So you have a very extensive background. So I'll let you introduce and share a little bit who you are, what kind of business you can go from
No, it sounds great. Thanks for the opportunity. Happy to be here. This is Food Allergy Awareness Month, and so it's probably the best time to talk about this condition. It impacts around 9 to 10 million kids across the country. So certainly many parents, many moms in your mom's group who are impacted. I'm a unusual guy. I have 5 board certifications. I'm a pulmonary ICU transplant immunologist who happens to be an allergist. I got into the food allergy space 20 years ago when I saw patients who just did not do well and really wanted to try to find a solution. I've immersed myself in that space now for 20 years, and we've built the largest organization in the food allergy space, both for diagnostics and for therapy in the world at this stage. We have a location in San Diego County, and obviously our main headquarters here in LA County. And that's been our world. We are here to support the entire community. We're here to support and advocate on behalf of both adults and kids who suffer from food anaphylaxis. It is real. It is serious. It can be fatal. And so our job is to make sure that everyone knows when you're dealing with food allergies to kind of take it to the highest level, take it and be really aware. Number one. Number two, be very supportive. I feel like, the 20 years I've been in this space, it hasn't changed enough. The general community has not kind of turned around and said, you know what, let's try and do the best we can to help, the millions of kids and adults, who suffer from this condition.
Absolutely. And you guys exclusively treat children. What?
Yeah, so when we treat patients, we're treating them roughly from about a year of age all the way up to 30 years of age now. Okay. So we've expanded that to the young adult population. But yeah, absolutely, the majority of the patients we've treated over the last 20 years are basically young toddlers all the way to teenagers. And our success rate is remarkable in what we do, and we are able to get patients to go from a state of anaphylaxis to a state of full remission where they consume foods like a non-allergic person.
Which is absolutely amazing to read through those stories, see the basic, the excitement. I think we'd love to just start from the basics, or maybe for people who don't understand allergy. Can you explain what a food allergy is? Just take it for patient.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so food allergy is a immune response. It's your body's immune system reacting to a food protein, and often it's one of the top 9 allergens. So top 9 allergens are milk, eggs, wheat, soy, peanuts, tree nuts, and sesame. In addition, there's fish and shellfish. So it could be one of those proteins in one of those foods, or it could be many proteins in many foods. Everyone's immune system is different. And the basic problem is your body is looking at this protein and saying, this is something foreign. This is something that should not be in my system. And it releases an actual immune response that's driven through an allergic cascade through a set of molecules that's actually not too dissimilar than when you get a bee sting or you get, another type of allergic reaction. But the problem is because you're consuming the food, the immune response can be quite rapid and it can be quite significant. So individuals who actually have a food allergy, they may develop hives, they may develop lip swelling, they may develop tongue and throat swelling, which can compromise their airway. And if it's not taken care of very quickly, it will then spread and ultimately cause the patient to have low blood pressure and to go into a state of shock, which is ultimately very much life-threatening. So food allergies are very different from like a food sensitivity, which is a totally different kind of topic of discussion. But food allergies and food anaphylaxis, for which we are here to kind of advocate for the month of May, is a very serious problem.
And this is might be a question, but when children have these symptoms that happen like a threatening reaction right away, or is it something that starts with intolerance kind of?
That's a good question. Most individuals, most kids, when they develop their first allergic episode, it's usually a relatively mild to moderate episode. So, it'll look pretty serious. They'll have lip swelling, eye swelling, pretty significant rash, some trouble breathing. The problem is as they get older, those reactions often get worse. And so the immune system has memory. And if the immune system decides to kind of hold itself in that position, the next time they get exposed to that food, the reaction can be very, very serious.
Wow. And if you could give one piece of advice, I guess, to parents as when their child is first diagnosed with a food allergy, what would that be?
Well, again, I've been doing this for a very long time, and although I myself don't suffer from them, and my kids don't have them, I've certainly, understood that life and how difficult it is. And I would describe it as the following. When you look at how we organize our lives around food, it is everything. It is part of every social circumstance. It's part of everything you do with even in your career. And when you finally have a child, most of those great moments you get to enjoy with your kid are also around food. All of a sudden that changes, right? After a reaction, you're like, okay, food is now something that's like terrible. Like we have to look at it very differently. My advice for someone who just got diagnosed or, who just had a child who had their first reaction is you must take a step back. You really must take a step back because it doesn't have to be so overwhelming and it doesn't have to change every aspect of your life. Absolutely. You got to take it seriously. You got to make sure that you know what the security measures are for food allergies, that you should carry an EpiPen, have additional medications, and always be ready. But at the same time, it is very much the case that most individuals are not allergic to everything. They're not going to be allergic to, majority of foods. There are those cases out there, but they are really, really rare. So you have to reorganize your life and your approach to things around security. And you have to say, okay, where can I go to get more information to make sure that my diagnosis is correct? Where can I go to make sure I get the maximum amount of support to know that my child will have the level of support they need as they go through this journey of living with food allergies? So I believe that is present. I mean, I believe that you can find good doctors and good systems that can actually make that happen. But what I found is that I feel that food allergy families almost, especially food allergy moms, they try to figure this out themselves. They kind of just say, I'm going to figure this out on my own. They go online, they go to a Facebook group, they go on Reddit, and they're just trying to figure this thing out. I would really advise against that. Go out there, talk to people, get into a community, and you will very quickly realize that you can kind of wrap your head around this thing. And now you have some time to see how this condition evolves. And as it evolves, it can get better. It could stabilize. And then, of course, there's systems like ours where we can actually, turn the disease state off.
Which is amazing. And I think it's a good piece of advice not ever go to Reddit. Advice. But how come then are allergies for you since the beginning? And then I did it doesn't it's on the pathways. So maybe just more information.
It's a big problem. I would love to tell you we have a hard answer on why it's on the rise. The honest answer is we don't have a single answer that I think would satisfy everyone. When you look at food allergies over the last, let's call it 60 to 70 years, it's definitely gone up. I mean, without a doubt. I mean, I talk to people in my generation and they will often say, we don't remember seeing a lot of people with food allergies. And, now it seems like it's very present. If you look at the, kind of the studies that are done on this, we are seeing about a 0.5% to 1% increase per roughly 10 to 15 years across the general population. That's a pretty high increase. If we had that, with other diseases, I think people would be very, afraid. That's a concern. So when something's increasing that fast, you worry about kind of two things. One is you worry about, infections or, something that can technically spread around. But there's really no evidence that this is attached to any kind of infection. And then the second thing you worry about is the environment. Is there something environmentally that's changing, that's aggravating people's immune systems? And there, I think we're starting to see some evidence, right? That environmentally, we're living in, some unique times. We have a lot of pollution, we have a lot of air biomass problems. We also have a lot of pollen, and we have a lot of, different factors that are hitting the immune system of kids at a young age. Those things can actually activate your immune system and really increase your risk to develop things like food allergies. So right now, I think that's where we see most of this rise attached to. And unfortunately, we're not seeing it slow down. So even though, the next generations are having kids, the amount of food allergies still continues to go up.
Absolutely. Is there any connection between eczema and food allergies?
Oh, for sure. When you look at the reaction that food allergies produce in somebody, you ingest this food, and now all of a sudden you have this immune response. At its kind of core, there's a protein in the body called IgE. That's called immunoglobulin E, or IgE for short. That protein is active in food allergy. It's active in asthma. It's active in eczema. It's active in any allergic state. So definitely there's a lot of interconnectivity. So if you look at our patient population, which is well over 20,000 patients historically, is specific with food anaphylaxis, we definitely see about 40 to 50% of them have an asthma diagnosis, about 30% of them have an eczema diagnosis. And then there's even other conditions that are affiliated that are also allergic.
Do most people that have food allergies tend to have seasonal or local allergies?
Yeah, I think you brought up a great point, which you alluded to earlier as well, which is how do you eventually develop the food allergy? Could it be something else that kind of feeds something else that, eventually turns it on? And the answer is absolutely yes. If you look at food allergies, we have, call it 9 to 10 million kids in this country with it, but we have about 25 million adults. And if you look at the adult population, 2/3 of them develop the allergy after the age of 18. In fact, most of the time it's in their 20s and 30s. But we have folks who are developing food anaphylaxis in their 50s, 60s, and even their 70s. And so they are reacting to foods that they used to consume, right? So they used to eat, it could be, fish or walnuts or something of that nature. And something has changed about their immune system where one day they'll eat it and have the stomach upset. They don't feel good. So then they kind of stop eating, walnuts for a bit. The next time they eat it, their throat gets very itchy. And then they stop for a bit. And the next time they eat it, they get hives. And now we're starting to go down that pipeline of what it means to develop a food allergy. So absolutely, there's many factors that can feed into what allergies can turn into and how it develops. Most recently, with the pandemic, there's been plenty of reports and case studies out there looking at patients who developed pretty significant COVID, and that uncovered a food allergy. So after a major infection, then they develop food allergies. So there's a lot to learn, but definitely a lot of interconnectivity in the process.
Awesome. And we actually had some questions in the chat here. Okay, I'll ask a few of those. First one, Kelly, when is the age reduced depending? She had kind of heard different ages.
Honey so honey has a couple aspects to it, right? So we generally don't recommend honey in infants because depending on where you get your honey, there's a risk of how it is packaged, and there's a risk of a toxin that's from botulinum. So basically like the same thing that Botox is made of, but the botulinum toxin. So that has nothing to do with allergy, but we generally don't recommend honey for very infants because if they get exposed, it could be a really bad thing. But, after the age of 1, it's not a problem. Honey itself is actually not, let me be really careful here. It's extremely rare to be allergic to honey. But the problem is honey has some things in it, right? So honey has lots of pollen proteins. And so if you get pretty natural honey, products, especially that are maybe from a locally sourced option, there's going to be a lot of pollen in that. So a kid who's very pollen allergic could actually consume that honey and get a runny nose or even start coughing and have that type of symptom. That's something you want to look into. You probably want to, figure that out. The other thing is honey can actually contain very small amounts of bee venom. So the actual bee sting venom can actually cross-react with honey, in some cases. So then you'd worry about a bee sting allergy in somebody who actually consumes honey and then may have some symptoms. So the answer to the question is you can introduce it any time after age 1, but definitely be aware of any sort of symptoms that you may see. The vast majority of people who consume honey are going to be just fine.
But do you have more? Do you think a lot of the food allergies are kids today because of the maybe the chemicals in our foods?
Yeah, I mean, it's look, there's a lot of things that are very bad about our food system, right? I mean, everything from consumer packaged goods to microplastics, to GMOs. we have a pretty messy system, and we've had a messy system, honestly, for about 40 to 50 years. If we were going to link it directly to food allergies, I would argue that, the way our commercialized food system operates, it doesn't totally add up to the increase in food allergies. It didn't happen at the same time. And then I look globally, right? You look at the rest of the world where, they're developing food allergies at a pretty fast pace right now. You're seeing it in developing countries. You're seeing it even in Africa, places where you didn't see a lot of food allergies is now starting to pop up. And they have been exposed to a lot of these same kind of, let's call them non-ideal food, systems. They've been exposed to that for at least 20 to 30 years. And it's only been the last 5 or so that we're seeing it. So I don't think they're directly related. However, I certainly can't say that's 100%. And I don't think that chemicals that are in a lot of these food-based packaging and processing is a good thing at all. And that's something that we should all try to I think learn more about and stay away from.
Sure, the effects in your way we're talking.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's go on to the next one. Why is strict avoidance the default recommendation? And then what are the limitations to that approach with food?
Yeah. So I'll take you back to kind of the 1990s. In the 1990s, the recommendation was to not give a baby any form of egg, like just eggs, no eggs until they are basically 6 months of age, no cow's milk until they were 1 year of age, no peanuts or tree nuts until they were typically 2 to 3 years of age, and then no fish until they were 5 years old. Now, this was recommendations for almost a decade. Why did they make those recommendations? Because if you go to the 80s and even earlier, there were a lot of kids having really bad reactions in those different age groups to those foods. And, parents were not prepared. ERs and hospitals were not prepared, and a lot of bad things happened. So they just went really, really conservative. Also during that time, when somebody was diagnosed, say, with a peanut allergy, they were like, just avoid everything, avoid peanuts and tree nuts. Why? Because they thought individuals would not be able to tell apart, like say you were, I don't know, at a restaurant and you looked at something, could you tell what one tree nut was from another, and so on and so forth. So they just got very scared. Keep in mind, this is also a time when we didn't have a lot of good testing. So you fast forward to kind of the 2000s, that's when I got involved in the space. And one of the first things that I did is I went in and tried to find and build much, much better testing abilities. So newer types of tests, different types of tests, highly accurate types of tests. And that kind of helped change things around, because now we could actually use some forms of testing to really tell, hey, who's anaphylactic to walnuts and who's actually just anaphylactic to, say, cashews. Like, you can separate these things in a very clear way. So I think that gave people a lot more confidence. And then around that time, they started saying, well, maybe we can have people only avoid what we think they're anaphylactic to. And kind of herein lies the problem, in that the accuracy of saying, hey, we can tell what you're allergic to is not very good. It's somewhere around 50%. So whether you go get standard blood tests, you go get standard skin tests, those little scratch tests on your back, they're only about 50% accurate. So, that doesn't make people feel too good. And then the next step is, well, if you're not sure if you're allergic to something or not, let's go ahead and do a food challenge, right? So they'll actually bring you into the office and just give you the food. And the problem there is about 25% of food challenges, if not a bit higher, will actually result in an anaphylactic reaction. And then that doesn't make people feel good. So, we've kind of been seesawing between, hey, should we be super conservative and avoid everything, or we should be more aggressive and try to really dial this thing in? And then I'll just come back to kind of the work that we do, where we actually get to solve those problems in a very clear way.
Very interesting. And we did get one question that was sent in kind of relate. What is the process for somebody who is having food allergy or sensitivity? Is it for your and what do you, or is there a great check to you, or how does?
Well, I'll tell you, it's definitely very frustrating. That's probably the best word to use, because you can go online and you'll find these like food sensitivity tests that you can order, and you can spend $300 and you can poke your finger and send this thing off and you'll get all this information back. The problem with a lot of those tests, again, comes back down to accuracy, right? So those types of tests that are over the counter, number one, they're not FDA approved. Number two, the accuracy is just very, very low to what is specific to your case. So I'd say for individuals who think they have a food sensitivity, it's actually a bit, like I said, the word's frustrating. I would go to your general practice doctor and say, hey, this is what I think is going on, because sometimes it can be other things, right? And so, for example, you might be sensitive to, garlic or something of that nature. But when they actually kind of, do some investigation, you might just have some gut, acid reflux. You can have other types of problems, and then they can help decipher. So I do think it's a good idea to go through that first door. After that, depending on what your sensitivity looks like, you're either going to go see a GI doctor, so a gastrointestinal specialist, where they're going to try and look at your actual gut and say, okay, maybe there's something else going on here, like celiac disease, or is there something with the different enzymes inside the gut that we need to investigate? And those can be tested very nicely. They don't always involve like a camera down your intestine. They can be done different ways. And then often the other approach is to go see an allergist, where much of what they can do is try to assess how much of your sensitivity is tied to different allergens. So typically you're looking at a triangulated approach. Get your general practice doc engaged, get to a GI doc, and get to an allergist.
A lot of things. We have one more question here. I'm not sure this question. What are your thoughts on foods to avoid if someone is in a reaction to mold exposure? Can be done?
That's a complicated one. So when you look at kind of mold allergy is a problem. Remember, mold is everywhere. Number one, right? So if anyone thinks that we're not around mold, we are literally around it all the time. We kind of live with mold everywhere, even in the cleanest, most hygienic places you can ever imagine. There's going to be some mold there. So mold is an organism that we essentially live with. There are different kinds of mold. There's outdoor molds, and then there's molds that are kind of inside your home and inside your bathrooms and things of that nature. So when your body decides to develop an allergic response to mold, which is common, it's actually quite common, the typical response is going to be respiratory. So your first signs and symptoms are going to be coughing, kind of some sneezing, that type of thing, or actually wheezing or asthma type symptoms. So if that's the world you're in, and that's kind of what you're seeing, you definitely want to get tested, because if you are in that kind of situation, you want to know which actual molds you are reacting toward, and you can actually target those things in your environment and eliminate them, and that makes everything much, much better. In people who are highly mold responsive, we can actually find other ways to manage them with different types of treatment. As far as food is concerned, there's actually very, very few foods that are tied to mold allergy. Some examples would be yeast, so baker's yeast and other types of yeast products, especially in a non-active form, so just the powder, that can actually be quite reactive. So it's not, kind of set properly. And you actually worry about certain types of mushrooms, because they kind of house certain types of mold as well. So if you're eating those in an uncooked form, they can be problematic. But other than those two things, there's actually not much on the food list.
Interesting. And we are here to discuss the Tolerance Induction Program. And I want to kind of just let you give a little background for people like you. Then there another, right?
Yeah, oral immunotherapy.
Yes. And then just a little different.
Yeah. And so this is really specific for individuals who have a kid or they themselves have food anaphylaxis, right? So if you have anaphylaxis to food, how do you know you have anaphylaxis? You pretty much by definition carry around an EpiPen, right? And anybody who's carrying around EpiPen knows what that means and knows why they have to carry this thing. And so when you look at having a food allergy, so let's say you're allergic to something like dairy, milk. Um, as you grow up, you can have different levels of control, right? I mean, when you're an infant becoming a toddler, there's many other options besides dairy, so you can kind of avoid that essentially and be relatively safe. But the problem is now you go to preschool, now you go to kindergarten, and every other kid is bringing milk to that classroom, and that's where the risk now goes way, way up. All that needs is one mistake, and now we could be dealing with a really, really bad problem. So parents who are kind of in those situations are often looking for a solution. They don't want to just avoid. They don't want to just carry an EpiPen all the time. And so in the world of what we call treatments, what can you do to treat food allergies? There's been certainly, I'd call it progress in the last 30 years. Obviously we're going to talk about our program, but there's been attempts at trying to figure out how to convince the immune system to not react that way to something like dairy, right? In the last 30 years, there's been a lot of money spent by pharma companies. There's been different approaches by different allergists, and they have had different levels of success. We'll talk specifically about OIT, or oral immunotherapy. This is a process where you'd go to a local doctor, and to be fair, there's not many doctors in the country who actually do OIT. Because with it comes a level of risk. I mean, it's a serious thing. So if you're allergic to dairy, you'd go in and see this allergist. The allergist would basically try to, quote, desensitize you to the dairy. How would they do that? They would ask you to come in every week, usually for many hours, so sometimes 4 hours to 6 hours, and they would give you a very diluted form of cow's milk, often in a dropper, and you're taking it drop by drop for the 46-hour period of time. If you pass that time period, then you go home on that small number of drops and you rinse and repeat. You kind of do the same cycle again and again and again. After about 9 to 12 months, some of these patients will be able to consume about, let's call it 3 teaspoons of cow's milk, right? So just a little bit, but enough to protect them potentially from a cross-contamination event, right? So if that small child was in preschool and they happened to take a sip of somebody else's milk, not that they would have no reaction, but they would potentially have, very minimum of a reaction. So that's kind of what OIT is. It's a long desensitization process that's labor intensive, and that's it. OIT is also, unfortunately, doesn't have a huge success rate. The success rate, especially for something like dairy, is extremely low. It's often in the 30 to 40% range. If you look at other things like peanut, sometimes it's up to 60%, but the rate of success is variable. The other problem is, as you do those little desensitization visits, they can actually develop allergic reactions. And so imagine you're going through that process, and then in the middle of that process, boom, you have a reaction. You have to use an EpiPen. That's also can be hard on little kids to go through that process. But nonetheless, it is a treatment that's out there. There's one FDA approved form of oral immunotherapy. It was called Palforzia. It was made for peanut. It started in 2020, but due to, again, some reactions and kind of lack of interest, it's kind of fizzled out in the last couple of years. But that's kind of what OIT is. My program, the Tolerance Induction Program, is a very, very different approach to things. So what we do here is we start off with a bunch of testing data, right? So what I've built here is essentially a very unique form of immunotherapy that's built on technology. So we use lots and lots of technology to answer a couple of questions. Patients come in, we draw their blood, we run additional tests. We're running about 400 tests on every single patient when they come in. That's a lot of tests. We're studying all different kinds of food, and we're studying their immune system, those two major areas. What we then do is take that data and we feed it into our AI system. So we have an artificial intelligence system that will then go ahead and assess that patient and say, okay, what are you allergic to? How allergic are you to those foods? And what amount of food would trigger what type of reaction? Which is really impressive and interesting and important data to have. We've built that now over 20 years of time. That's been published and well accepted as one of the highest accuracy forms of diagnosis that's out there. So that's what we've been doing. What we then do is take that information and then actually take a protein like cow's milk, and we will find all of the biosimilar proteins that exist in the space, and we will give those proteins to our patients over a sequence of time at home. So they actually do the majority of the treatment at home. And before they know it, they're coming into the program, and without ever having given them cow's milk, like we've never given them cow's milk, we've only given them biosimilar proteins, we've turned it down their immune response to cow's milk. So we're convincing the immune system to interact through data science and turn down that immune response. So by the time they come in and actually start cow's milk, we're usually done with it in about 6 weeks. I mean, if you imagine, so they used to never drink cow's milk, and 6 weeks they went from zero to, generally it's a 4 to 5 ounce challenge, which is a, good sized glass of milk. And by the time they're done with the program, they're consuming a 10-ounce glass of milk in just a matter of a few minutes, and they're free and clear. They can eat pizza, ice cream, anything that they want without restriction. So that's what we do. And we use data science throughout the entire program to study their progress. It is patient specific, it's highly accurate. And our side effect rate is very low. It's basically less than 1% for anything significant. About 18% of our patients during their entire treatment program will only have one report of any symptom. So we're very proud of that. We have a big team here who helps get this done every single day. We conduct about 3,000 food challenges a month, which is absolutely huge. And we have, about 60% of our patients come here from out of state or out of country. So they fly here from all around the world to receive treatment.
Which is really cool because once I kind of deep dove into this, but just to see all those stories related, I had a dairy allergy growing. I didn't because better, I eventually outgrew it, and that segues to one of the questions we is about growing food out, and that is actually something that can happen directly if you have a kid.
Yeah, absolutely. So the term that I often talk about is what I call natural tolerance, right? So what does tolerance mean? Well, the immune system, in order to be tolerant of a food, has to be able to look at that food and say, all right, I know exactly what this is. I know how often I'm going to see that food. And I know what type of immune response I want to generate to that food. Great. So as you just mentioned with your case, so when you're very young and let's say you're 1 year old and you have an allergic reaction to dairy, what do you do next? Does that mean that allergy will persist or will it be what we call non-persistent? So if it's non-persistent, you're going to be able to eat dairy in a matter of 3 or 4 years, or sometimes even sooner. Those individuals basically have an immune system that has developed natural tolerance, right? They have adapted and said, I'm going to naturally be tolerant. We're good. So those types of patients are great stories because you're like, hey, wonderful. You don't have to worry about this anymore, just like you, and you can go ahead and enjoy food. I'm going to go back to my example earlier about the adult patients, right? So you're in your 20s and you've eaten sushi your whole life. Everything's good. Somehow in your 20s, all of a sudden now you're eating shellfish and you get a stomach ache. Then you get some hives. Okay. And then all of a sudden your lip swells and now you have, so what happened to your natural tolerance there? You had it and now you lost it. Right. And now you're back to being allergic. So this is the kind of fine balancing point between what is natural tolerance and what is, kind of a recurrent allergy, if you want to look at it from that standpoint. So what we tell folks is, if you have a very small child, the chance of you having a persistent allergy or something that's going to stick around till adulthood is absolutely highest in fish, shellfish, peanuts, and tree nuts. For sure, those are going to be the highest numbers. They are generally kind of in that 90% range. And so not quite a slam dunk, but definitely likely going to stick around. Milk and egg are changing. So egg used to be, somewhere around, let's call it 50%. 50% of kids with an egg allergy, by the time they're 2 years of age, they're able to consume eggs. That number is probably going to stick around like a 70% chance by the time you're older that you'll be able to consume eggs. Dairy, on the other hand, is getting worse. So dairy used to kind of have the same numbers as egg, but now we're seeing dairy allergies stick around longer and longer. We're not sure why that is, but it's definitely something we're seeing, which is unfortunate. So I'd say one little piece of advice is don't look at it as, quote, outgrowing it. Look at it as trying to figure out how to develop tolerance. And absolutely, once you're able to actually consume these foods, please consume them. Don't even yourself, don't ever stop drinking milk. Because that memory in the distance ago can come back and cause problems again.
It's funny that you I never tend to use each string, but I love people. So I always get mad at Nikki each, but I never any Jews or clear, like, you know, you know, anyways, what is it? And garlic too. My best friend, she developed it as well when she was about 21, and she's 41 now. And I mean, she's been around for me. It's kind of his own president. Like,
Yeah, I mean, it is difficult, and there's a good example this past weekend of the Kentucky Derby where one of the NBC broadcasters, his name is Mike Tirico. He basically was in a situation where he had an EpiPen reaction going on air live, and he consumed some nuts, and he knew he had a sensitivity to it, but has not had a reaction in a long time, and that hit him really pretty hard and fast.
wow. And I know we're kind of on the verge of time here, so I'm trying to go through. We have one more question, and I just want to put a little reminder that we are going to play a ticket to an event, which is Big Father's photo shoot on Tuesday. So if you are here, allowed to comment and say hello. I did get the question. Maybe please person to what is the reason for those who
It's a great question. TIP is a highly organized kind of data science-based program. It is definitely a commitment for a couple of years, depending on how many allergens you have. So when you look at our success rate, we have a near 100% success rate. So if you're able to stay in the program for a couple of years, you're going to finish and you're going to be fine. We do have a dropout rate. It's not very high. It's depending on the quarter, it's somewhere around 1 to 2%. But it's generally a dropout rate, not due to our program, but just due to travel, sometimes a picky eater, something of that nature. So no, our numbers are solid. Our patients know that as they get through the program, if they could just finish the whole thing, you're going to hit the finish line. You'll hit remission, and they hit what we call food freedom, where they can eat whatever they want, whenever they want, without restrictions.
which I love that segue. Can you tell me about favorite success story, just so I can feel it now? Like
Sorry.
a story.
Oh, gotcha. Yes, thank you. Look, I'll just give you one quick one because I know we're at time. But I just had a patient here this last week, and he's older, but we have so many stories. His mom is in the medical field, and he came out here from Florida, from Miami, Florida. He is anaphylactic to peanuts, one tree nut, and then really anaphylactic to dairy. And it took him about 2 years and 4 months to finish the program. And when he came out here, and I don't know if I can even show something like this, but I'll try. He came out here and he was so excited because he was passing his final challenge, again, which is 10 ounces of milk. He showed up here and he looked like this. He actually came in with a graduation cap and gown, and because he knew he did one of the biggest things in his life. And on that graduation cap and gown were all of his allergens, knowing now that he's free and clear. And this mom brought, the grandparents. It was a big family affair. And that story is a common story here, right? I mean, imagine your entire life changing. And if you're a young person, that means the rest of your life now is in a whole different spot. So we love those success stories. And again, anybody who's interested in our program, check out our website. You can talk to our enrollment team anytime. We have regular webinars on a monthly basis. And, we're always happy to talk to folks.
Yes. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And definitely excited to share more success stories and share all the good work you guys are doing. It's a true testament. Get my in the gym, we stick with things, you get things done. I think in life it's a pretty standard kind of model you have to go with. So,
That's awesome. Well, awesome. Thank you very much, Nikki. Appreciate it. And good luck to everybody on the Moms Group here.
Appreciate it. Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.